Jimmy Fallon was asking Rosalía about her incredible vocal techniques when something in her expression suddenly shifted. The Spanish superstar, who had been confidently discussing her flamenco fusion style moments before, went quiet and touched her throat unconsciously. "Jimmy," she said softly, her accent thick with emotion, "the doctors told me I might never sing again." The Tonight Show studio, which had been celebrating her groundbreaking music career, fell into stunned silence. Rosalía's confession hung in the air like a death sentence that nobody was prepared to hear. Jimmy's enthusiastic smile faded as he realized this wasn't a casual comment about vocal rest. This was something catastrophic and deeply personal. It was September 12th, and Rosalía had come on the show to promote her latest album and upcoming world tour. The interview had been energetic, full of her passion for music and innovative artistry that had revolutionized flamenco for a new generation. But when Jimmy asked about her distinctive vocal style, something inside her finally cracked. "My vocal cords are permanently damaged," Rosalía continued, her voice trembling. "I've been hiding it for 3 years." The words escaped like secrets that had been suffocating her from the inside. The studio fell into complete shock. Jimmy's face showed pure disbelief and growing concern. The audience seemed frozen, processing this devastating revelation from someone whose voice had become iconic around the world. "What do you mean, permanently damaged?" Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and confusion. "Rosalía, your voice it's everything to your music." His tone had shifted completely from entertainment host to deeply worried friend. "During the recording of Mal Querer, I pushed too hard," Rosalía explained, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I wanted perfection, so I sang for 18 hours straight, multiple days in a row." Her voice carried the weight of a decision she would regret forever. "The traditional flamenco techniques, combined with my modern style, created too much strain," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "But I couldn't stop, because I knew this album would change everything." The irony of destroying her voice while creating her masterpiece wasn't lost on anyone. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on the young woman sitting across from him. "When did you first realize something was wrong?" he asked carefully, understanding this was incredibly painful territory. "After recording Pienso en tu mirada," Rosalía replied, the specific song etched in her memory. "I woke up the next morning and couldn't make any sound." The image she painted was terrifying for anyone, but especially devastating for a vocalist. "I went to the hospital thinking it was just fatigue," she continued, her voice taking on a clinical tone. "But the doctor showed me the scans." She paused, clearly reliving that moment of devastating diagnosis. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't a pop star giving an interview anymore. This was an artist sharing the potential end of everything she'd worked for. The cameras captured every emotion crossing her face. "He said I had vocal nodules, polyps, and severe scarring," Rosalía explained, listing her injuries like battle wounds. The damage was so extensive that surgery might not help. Her voice cracked as she spoke, providing real-time evidence of her struggle. Jimmy felt his own eyes welling up with emotion. "What did the doctors recommend?" he asked softly, though he seemed almost afraid to hear the answer. "Complete vocal rest for 6 months minimum," Rosalía replied, her laugh bitter and sad. "No singing, no talking above a whisper." She gestured helplessly. "But I had an album to promote, tours booked, millions of fans waiting." "So what did you do?" Jimmy prompted, understanding that she clearly hadn't followed medical advice. Rosalía's expression grew even more pained. "I chose my career over my health," she admitted without hesitation. "I've been performing in pain for 3 years." Her confession carried the weight of someone who had made an impossible choice. Behind the scenes, producers were grappling with how to handle this unprecedented revelation. This wasn't entertainment. This was someone potentially ending their career on live television. But they recognized the importance of letting Rosalía tell her story. "Every time I sing, it feels like swallowing glass," Rosalía continued, her voice growing smaller, I take painkillers before every performance. The medication dependency she described was alarming and heartbreaking. But the worst part, she said, her voice breaking completely now, is knowing that every note I sing could be damaging my voice more. The ongoing destruction she was causing herself was devastating to hear. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to sit in the chair next to Rosalía, abandoning the traditional interview setup. "Rosalía, why are you telling us this now?" he asked gently. "Because I can't pretend anymore," she replied, looking directly at him. "Last week I lost my voice completely during a concert in Madrid." Her confession revealed the severity of her current condition. "I was singing con altura, and suddenly, nothing," she continued, touching her throat again. The audience thought it was part of the show. Her ability to hide such a catastrophic moment spoke to her professionalism and desperation. "How long have you been able to sing since then?" Jimmy asked, his concern evident. Rosalía's pause before answering was telling. "This is my first time speaking above a whisper in 5 days," she admitted. "I'm not supposed to be here." Her presence on the show was clearly against medical advice. The vulnerability in her admission was staggering. Jimmy reached over and gently placed his hand on her arm. "Rosalía, what do your doctors say will happen if you keep performing?" "Complete voice loss within 2 years," she said simply. Permanent silence. The timeline she described hung in the air like a countdown to professional death. "And if I stop singing now and have surgery," she continued, "there's maybe a 50% chance I could recover some function." The statistics weren't encouraging, making her impossible choice even more heartbreaking. The audience was transfixed by Rosalía's vulnerability. Many were thinking of their own careers, their own health sacrifices, their own impossible choices between passion and self-preservation. Her story was creating space for shared understanding about the cost of artistic pursuit. "What keeps you going?" Jimmy asked, understanding that her decision to continue performing despite the consequences required extraordinary motivation. Rosalía looked directly into the camera before answering. "The music isn't just mine anymore," she said, her voice growing stronger despite the pain. "It belongs to every girl who sees herself in my songs." Her sense of responsibility to her audience was both inspiring and tragic. "When I see young Latinas singing my lyrics, learning flamenco because of me," she continued, "I realize I can't abandon them." Her mission had become bigger than her individual health. "But I also know I'm setting a terrible example," she admitted, her honesty cutting. "I'm teaching young artists that they should destroy themselves for their art." The contradiction in her situation was clearly eating away at her. Jimmy was visibly emotional as he listened to her internal struggle. "Have you considered taking a break?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "I've tried," Rosalía replied. "But every time I think about stopping, I think about my team, my band, the dancers." Her sense of responsibility extended far beyond herself. "Hundreds of people depend on my voice for their livelihoods. And then there's the music itself," she continued, her passion breaking through despite her pain. "I have so many songs inside me that need to come out." Her artistic drive was both her greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness. "Sometimes I wonder if this is how flamenco artists have always suffered," she said, connecting her struggle to the tradition she'd modernized. "Maybe pain is part of the authenticity." Her romanticizing of suffering was concerning but understandable. "Would you be willing to do something for us?" Jimmy asked, making a spontaneous decision. "Would you sing just a little bit so people can understand what you're going through?" Rosalía hesitated for a long moment, clearly weighing the risk against the opportunity to demonstrate her struggle. Finally she nodded. "Maybe it's time for people to hear what's happening to my voice." What followed was unprecedented in television history. Rosalía began singing Malamente a cappella, her signature song that had launched her international career. For the first few notes, her voice was recognizable, powerful, the instrument that had captivated millions worldwide. But as she continued, the damage became evident. Her voice cracked on the high notes, wavered on sustained phrases, and occasionally disappeared entirely. The contrast between her artistic ambition and physical limitation was heartbreaking to witness. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of music's most distinctive voices literally broke apart in real time. Some people were openly crying, understanding they might be witnessing the end of an era. When she finished, the studio was completely silent for several seconds. Then, slowly, the audience began to applaud, not the typical entertainment applause, but something deeper, more respectful, acknowledging her courage and vulnerability. "Thank you," Jimmy said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "That was incredibly brave." Rosalía wiped her eyes, clearly emotionally and physically drained from the performance. "Now everyone knows," she said quietly. "My voice is dying, and I'm the one killing it." Her stark assessment of her situation was brutal in its honesty. "What happens next?" Jimmy asked, understanding that this revelation would change everything for her career. Rosalía considered the question carefully. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe this was my goodbye." The possibility that they had just witnessed her final televised performance hung heavily in the air. They talked for a few more minutes about the pressure on artists to push through pain, about the music industry's demanding schedule, and about the importance of health over career. Rosalía was more genuine and vulnerable than she'd ever been in public. When the interview ended, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing off to her next commitment, Rosalía stayed on stage, talking with audience members who approached her with their own stories of career sacrifices and health struggles. The studio became an impromptu support group. "I never expected this response," Rosalía told Jimmy, as they watched people sharing their stories around them. "I thought people would be disappointed that their idol is broken." Jimmy shook his head. "They see someone human, someone brave enough to admit when the cost is too high." The episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to minimize Rosalía's vocal struggles during her performance. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with vocal health specialists and music industry professionals praising her honesty. Within hours, Vocal Health Matters began trending on social media. Music schools started implementing mandatory vocal health education. Artists began publicly discussing their own voice-related struggles. Rosalía had accidentally started a movement about sustainable artistry. Other musicians began reaching out privately, thanking Rosalía for giving them permission to address their own health issues. Adele shared her own vocal surgery experience. John Mayer discussed his throat problems. The culture of silence around artists' physical health began crumbling. 3 weeks later, Rosalía made a public announcement. She was canceling her world tour and entering intensive vocal therapy. "I choose to fight for my voice rather than fight against it," she wrote on social media. 6 months later, she returned to The Tonight Show. She looked different, more at peace, though her voice was noticeably changed. "How are you doing?" was Jimmy's first question, asked with genuine care. "I'm healing," Rosalía replied, her voice quieter but clearer than before. "The surgery helped, but I'll never sound exactly the same again." Her acceptance of her new limitations was both sad and inspiring. Rosalía had used the months since her revelation to become an advocate for vocal health and sustainable artistic practices. Her foundation had funded research into vocal injury prevention and treatment programs for professional singers. "Any regrets about that night?" Jimmy asked. Rosalía shook her head without hesitation. "None," she said firmly. "Sharing my truth saved my voice, and possibly my life." The Tonight Show partnered with vocal health organizations directly because of Rosalía's appearance. They featured regular segments on artist wellness, sustainable performance practices, and the importance of prioritizing health over career demands. Jimmy learned something profound that September night that changed how he discussed artistic pressure with guests. Thereafter, "I realized that asking artists to perform despite pain isn't entertainment," he reflected later. "It's exploitation." Rosalía's vocal cord revelation became more than a viral moment. It became a cultural shift in how the music industry approaches artist health, leading to new standards for tour schedules, recording practices, and vocal care education. The ripple effects continued for years. Music conservatories began requiring vocal health courses. Recording studios implemented mandatory break schedules. Countless artists found the courage to prioritize their health after seeing their hero make that difficult choice. Years later, Rosalía would say that revealing her vocal damage on live television saved her career by forcing her to rebuild it sustainably. "That night, I stopped being a voice that was breaking apart and started being an artist, learning to sing again," she reflected. The lesson of that extraordinary September night was profound. Sometimes admitting weakness becomes our greatest strength. And sometimes the most courageous performance is the one where we stop pretending everything is perfect. In a world that demands constant output from artists, Rosalía reminded everyone watching that voices, literal and metaphorical, need care, rest, and protection. Her damaged vocal cords became symbols of an industry that pushes too hard, too fast. And her recovery became proof that sustainable artistry is possible when we're brave enough to admit when we need help.